All right, good morning. So we're on page Tzaddik of the Rebbe's Haggadah. That'll be this thing here. It's the third page. And today we're going to analyze the Rebbe's commentary on the precise wording of the text read before eating the koirach, before eating the sandwich. We described at length the sandwich business. And as I mentioned, God willing, we'll get more in depth.
I'm looking at this one now.
Before Pesach, God willing. So let's read the text again of the choice words that the Alter Rebbe writes to be said on the top of the page. So first of all, the Rebbe noted that the Alter Rebbe writes in his instructions, "V'yoymar zeh," you shall say this, as opposed to just saying "v'yoymar" and you shall say "kenasa." "V'yoymar zeh," you shall say this, and the Rebbe tells us that means that the Alter was being very precise in the words to be said here. Say this and not other words.
Because there are variants.
There are variants, and we're going to point out this. Sorry. The Sidurim have different variants, slight variations as to what to be said, and Rebbe is going to point out those variants and explain them. So the first thing to note, the Rebbe said, is that we don't say the words Zecher leMikdash Kehillel, to remember the temple times like Hillel. We don't say those words. Other versions have those words. That's number one. Number two, let's read. Kain asa Hillel, so did Hillel do. This is how we're reading it. Bizman should Beis Hamikdash haya kayim. The times when the Beis Hamikdash was standing.
Mm-hmm.
That word was in other texts aren't there, because it could have just said Bizman should Beis Hamikdash kayim, in the time when the temple stood. You don't have to say in the time the temple was standing. So that was, the Alter Rebbe inserts here, and we're going to learn why. Okay, now continue in the text. That's point number two, right? Point number one is we don't say the words Zecher leMikdash Kehillel. We don't say the words to remember the temple like Hillel. Number two, this extra word was standing rather than when the Beis Hamikdash stood. Okay, that's variant number two. Keep on going. Haya koirach, he would wrap. Hillel would wrap. Pesach, matzah, maror, the Pesach offering, the matzah and the maror v'oichel b'yachad, and eat them together. Some variants take the word Pesach out, because we aren't eating a Pesach offering. We're just having matzah and maror. So some variants, Dr. mentioned this in the Shulchan Aruch, will say that Hillel would wrap the matzah and maror together, because we're doing it like him, right? And it says, Kain asa Hillel, this is what Hillel did. This, as in what we're holding in our hand, is what Hillel did. And then we say Pesach, but we don't have a Pesach. So some variants don't have the word Pesach in it.
So what would he do? He would do one bracha, do two brachas, and then eat it?
What brachas did he make?
I mean,
that's a very good question, actually.
He did only that, right?
Yeah, so what bracha would he make?
You wouldn't do maror.
That's a good question. What bracha would he make?
Have to do hamotzi.
Hamotzi for sure, but which bracha and which mitzvahs?
I mean,
there are only two biblical mitzvahs. Okay, the two biblical mitzvahs available to him right there are the Pesach and the matzah. The maror is only obligation to eat with the Pesach, right? Matzah is independent biblical mitzvah, but biblically speaking, there's no independent mitzvah maror. So it's only that's post temple times to remember.
Only post temple.
Correct. But in temple times, maror is not an individual mitzvah. It's a detail of the Pesach mitzvah. So maybe you make one bracha that says Lechol Pesach matzah maror. I thank you, God our Lord, who has commanded us to eat the Pesach matzah and maror. Maybe one bracha listing all three. Maybe you would say Lechol Pesach Yachad matzah maror. Eat the Pesach along with matzah and maror. Maybe. Good question. Do some research. Find out what bracha would Hillel make when he would eat the sandwich in temple times. Good question. Okay, back to our text. It's a very good question. I'm sure there's discussion.
Yeah, because if you answer that question, it may give understanding to why the sages have their point of view and about doing it separately.
No. You see, the bracha comes after the fact, because bracha to begin with is rabbinic. The sages instituted you should thank Hashem for the mitzvah. So it's after the fact. You have to first try to figure out what did the Torah want, and then make the bracha match it. right?
Okay.
So the question is, what did the Torah want, and make your mitzvah match that? Make your bracha match that.
If you're eating a bagel with tomato and lettuce in it, would you say?
Okay, that's a different story, because there, the bracha you're making there is thanking Hashem for enjoying food. In which case, your bracha goes to the primary source of sustenance. In which case, the bagel is the primary source of sustenance, would cover your lettuce and tomatoes and your cheese inside.
Mhm.
But here, you're thanking Hashem for performing a mitzvah. You have to cover all the mitzvahs you're performing, which in Hillel's view, he's doing at least 2 biblical mitzvahs in one shot, which is matzah and Pesach. The Mara being an extension of the Pesach. Right? So I don't know. Good question. Okay, let's go back to the text here. Okay, so variant number 1 is that we don't say the word Zeichel Mikdash Kehillel like other texts do. Well, first of all, Rabbi Gimel noted this morning, it's true, there are some texts that actually don't even have this whole sentence, Kenos Hillel. They just go straight to eating the sandwich without making any declaration about what Hillel used to do. Just eating the sandwich. We do make a statement about what Hillel used to do, but we have a variant. Number 1, we don't say the words Zeichel Mikdash Kehillel to remember the temple like Hillel. We don't say that. We just say, this is what Hillel did. In the time the Beis Hamikdash was standing, that extra was. Number 2. Number 3.
Mention of Hillel.
With mention of Hillel. So would Hillel do in the time when the Beis Hamikdash was standing. But that extra was is not there in some other texts. And other variants to this text.
What's the difference in the
That was going to explain that.
Okay.
Right? What's the difference in what?
Why that piece is, what's the difference between leaving that piece in or leaving that
Okay,
piece
that's
out?
what that was going to explain for us. That was going to explain for us.
There's
That was going to explain for us. That's why I'm pointing them out, because they're about to explain them for us.
Okay.
And number 3, we say that Hillel used to have the Pesach, Matzah, and Maror and eat them together. Whereas other variants to the text leave the word Pesach out, because we aren't eating a Pesach. We're only eating Matzah and Maror. Okay, these are 3 variants that we're going to discuss. And then there's a 4th thing. We'll see if we'll get to that today, which is the source of this verse. Or can we say, as it says, you should eat it with matzah and maror. That verse actually comes from the second Pesach, Pesach Sheni, not the first Pesach. But we'll get to that maybe. I don't know if we'll get to that today. Okay, let's look at the Rebbe's commentary on the bottom.
What you mean? There is first Pesach and second Pesach.
Pesach Sheni, yeah.
But Pesach Sheni is after, not before.
Right, okay.
Okay. Then what is different between?
No.
No.
Okay.
For matzah and maror, a second Pesach
Okay.
we don't do.
Okay, and whatever. We'll leave it alone for right now. The Pesach Sheni. Okay. Let's, if we get there today, we'll do it. Otherwise, we'll look at it tomorrow. So let's look at the bottom, below the line, the Rebbe's commentary.
Which one? Here?
Here.
But okay.
Okay. So, Cain Asa Hillel, etc., the text that we just read. Cain hu b'siddur kol Yaakov. This is the text as it is found. We read this yesterday.
Where were you reading from?
Top right under below the line. Yeah.
Right here.
Italics is there is quoting the relevant section.
I started there. Okay.
Yeah, which is the
Cain who? Yeah, I see.
which is the text we just read that we're saying we're reciting this text before we eat, which is
Right.
to describe what Hillel used to do in the time when the temple was standing, and he would eat the Pesach, all that. Okay. Cain hu b'siddur kol Yaakov. This is the same text as it appears in the Siddur called Kol Yaakov by Rabbi Yaakov Emden. V'chein kosav gam b'chok Yaakov. It's also written to say so in the Chok Yaakov, which is a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, although the Shulchan Aruch itself doesn't mention it. Be'ed Heitiv, Mishnah Berurah has the same text, Al Pia Sofas HaTorah with the emendation of the Taz. Ela Sheshmitu, all these texts skipped Tevas Haya Hardashina. The first word was. So in all these sources,
Except for the Shulchan Aruch.
Shulchan Aruch doesn't have it at all.
This could be in Sephardi Ashkenaz.
No, because the Ramah doesn't have it either.
Oh.
Are all these sources Ashkenazic? Maybe. Okay, I'll leave it alone. I don't know. Maybe.
There were no in the time of but the Mikdash was not Ashkenazi, not Sephardi.
Right.
It's only
Yeah.
Yid.
So these versions skip the first word was. So they would write, this is what Hillel did in a time the Beis Hamikdash stood.
Okay.
Whereas we're saying in the time the Beis Hamikdash was standing, that extra was. Okay? And likewise, the first word was, doesn't appear in the text as it is written in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. In the Siddur, which we just read, it does say Haya was standing, but in the Shulchan Aruch it does not. In the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch.
Really?
Yeah, that's not uncommon.
How they
I
can
know,
read
you
Siddur
mentioned
if they don't all on the
Okay, we explained this already once. Let's see how we'll explain all of this. Okay, let's see. Yeah, we're clear so far? Second paragraph. We might suggest as the Rebbe, in pointing out the precise language of this variant. Aleph, these 3 points. Why we don't say Zeichel Mikdash Hillel, to remember the Mikdash like Hillel. We don't say that. Right?
Don't say, yeah.
That's number 1. Ein Oimrim, we don't say Zeichel Mikdash Hillel to remember the temple like Hillel. Why? Just like we don't say with respect to eating marar, Zeichel Mikdash to remember the Mikdash. Remember, the marar today is rabbinic to remember the fact that they used to eat marar in temple times. Because again, biblically speaking, marar is only an extension of Pesach offering, which means, biblically speaking, you're only obligated to eat marar when you have a Pesach offering. Rabbinically, the sages said, eat marar to remember the temple. And this is where we have the 2 opinions. The sages say, eat marar alone to remember the temple. Hillel says, eat Pesach and marar eat matzah and marar together to remember the temple. So both marar and the sandwich are both to remember the temple. One according to Hillel, one according to the sages. So just like we don't say, let's eat marar now to remember the temple, we don't say, let's eat the sandwich now to remember the temple. There?
But that's what, in fact, it is doing.
Correct?
We
It's
just
not
don't
making a
say-
statement.
we don't make
Yeah.
a statement.
That's correct.
We are lost.
Well, that's an interesting observation then. I mean, if you're doing it, why not say?
Okay, let's
That's
see.
another question.
Let's keep on
altogether.
going. Let's see. Let's keep on going. We're Pri Megadim, in a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch called Pri Megadim, skip the parentheses, which is a citation. Yeah, you're familiar with the Pri Megadim from Smicha?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit. So the Pri Megadim, a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, Mefaresh Ha'amida, he explains why we do say we're eating the sandwich now to remember the temple like Hillel. Why? L'idea, because we want to make a public declaration, Shurak Zeichel Mikdash, that this is only a remembrance of the temple. But nowadays, we don't fulfill our obligation with the sandwich. Right?
You don't? I mean, the purpose is to remember the.
But we aren't fulfilling our rabbinic obligation of eating matzah, let's say, with the
Marar.
with the sandwich. So we want to make it clear the obligations for matzah we did already.
Yeah.
And now we're doing it to remember because Hillel said to remember that way. That's what the people are going to say. This is a statement in favor of making the statement. This is an explanation in favor of making the statement. Let's do this to remember Hillel, to distinguish between obligatory, which we just finished doing, and the remembrance we're about to do. This is an explanation for why before you eat the sandwich you should make the declaration. This is only to remember.
Why you should.
Why you should make the statement. This is the Pri Megadim is saying.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, continue there, but continue saying. Because we're saying the statement after we ate the matzah and marar independently, and you've already fulfilled your obligation. Al karchach, therefore we must conclude, the Pri Megadim's intention here in saying that you're making the statement to distinguish between obligatory and remembrance, right? Shahaidahi, that the statement here, this is a remembrance of the temple, hilahazir, is to forewarn that a person shouldn't make a mistake for next year. Laimar thinking, that the halacha follows Hillel. Right? If you didn't make the statement that we're remembering,
and lump it all in one,
Oh,
and not do the
correct.
one.
The yita, and we'll make the mistake of thinking that Hillel's of the view that even today all you need to do is a sandwich. You might think that just like Hillel ate then a sandwich, today also a sandwich, and not know the subtleties that the marar doesn't work today with a matzah or the matzah won't work today with the marar because the marar outdoes the flavor. You don't know all of that. Hillel ate a sandwich. Last year we ate a sandwich copying Hillel. So this year I'm going to need a sandwich and fulfill the obligation according to Hillel. The yishkach, and I'll forget, that last year, matzah, that you ate matzah independently earlier, which is why you're allowed to have a sandwich now. The yishkash amar zeichel mikdash, but the fact that it makes a declaration says, oh, this sandwich is only to remember, he'll know, eat matzah independently, and then have the sandwich. This is Pri Megadim. Says the Rebbe, who doichet gadol. To me, this is very extraneous explanation, says the Rebbe. Why? Presumably, first of all, the fact, like, who's making this mistake?
Well, yeah, because
You remember last year you ate the matzah bar and then the sandwich, but next year you're going to think, oh, forget the first matzah bar, only the sandwich because I'm following Hillel only? And why between last year and this year did I decide that the halacha follows Hillel, not the sages? Why would I make the mistake of thinking that the halacha follows Hillel? I'm such a scholar to decide the halacha should follow Hillel, but not enough of a scholar to know that Hillel makes a distinction between the maror and the matzah. Rebbe doesn't like that.
was it speaking only to?
I'm adding that
scholars?
explanation. It doesn't say why. Sorry?
This is not speaking only to scholars. Speaking to.
But the simpleton who's making this mistake wouldn't to begin with make the mistake that the halacha follows only Hillel. In the same way last year I knew that, right? It's
Yeah,
very
I mean,
extraneous to say that the person next year is going to say, oh, last year I ate matzah and maror together like Hillel. Maybe I should just do that this year. But why did you decide the halacha follows Hillel? Rebbe doesn't explain why he says that this is an extraneous explanation. I'm just offering as to why. But now he's going to explain a little more. Ubefrat, specifically, okay, here's why I think it's an extraneous explanation, says the Rebbe. Shebakoirach hu koifel lashon ktsas. When it comes to the koirach, you're actually repeating yourself. To miyad omer, according to our variant, what do we say right before we eat? Kain asa Hillel is mikdash kayam. This is what Hillel used to do in the times of the Beis Mikdash.
That was back to my first question.
Ah, so since you're already saying, here's what Hillel said, here's what Hillel did in the times the Beis Mikdash stood, no reason to say I'm doing it now to remember it like Hillel. I'm already making a distinction between the sandwich and the first two things, right? And especially, ubein bracha v'akricha, we learned already that between the bracha, the matzah, and the sandwich, you should not make an interruption, any verbal interruption, unless you absolutely need to. And yet I am making this interruption by saying that this is what Hillel did.
Another reason.
So there you go.
Superfluous.
It's superfluousness.
And
it seems difficult that a person would make the mistake to begin with.
and you could break the chain of the bracha.
That's right.
Um,
No.
Not that.
Not no.
Interruption.
The interruption we're fine with, but the fact that he's saying you're not allowed to make an interruption between the bracha and the matzah unless you need to, and you're being told make an interruption, which is to say the statement, this is what Hillel used to do. That in and of itself is enough to make you remember next year that there's a difference between the sandwich and the matzah and maror, not to confuse and think that it's the Hillel.
That's the prima gutta.
No, but that's why the Prima Gadol said to say the extra statement Zeichel Mikdash Hillel.
Oh,
And they were saying you don't need to make that extra statement because you already covered it by the fact that you said this is what Hillel used to do.
yes, right. Correct.
By making that necessary interruption, you've already what the Prima Gadol is trying to forewarn, you've already done.
Superfluous.
It's superfluous, that's correct. Especially considering that the sages are making you make an interruption, even though you're not supposed to be making an interruption. That fact bolsters the notion that the interruption of this declaration, this is what Hillel used to do, is enough to forewarn the Prima Gadol's
You
problem.
can make failure on that.
Yeah.
If you mixed up, you make a failure.
Yeah. So Kanal mentioned before, parentheses. Ubemishta
Nothing
Berura,
is accurate.
yeah. The Be'er halacha, right? So Litches Kol Amir La'achar Sheyochel Mitam Zeh. The Mishnah Berura actually, says the Alter Rebbe, because of the issue of interruption between the bracha and the eating of the
Correct.
kairach, the Mishnah Berura wants to take the whole statement, this is what Hillel used to do, and tell you to say it after you eat the kairach. After you eat the kairach, make a declaration about what you just did.
And you still have the issue of superfluousness.
Right. But then they can say further, if the Alter Rebbe puts it before the kairach, not like the Mishnah Berura, which says do it, you should do it, or try to say to do it afterwards.
Right.
So how much more so, we don't need to make the extra statement, Zeichel Mikdash Hillel, as the Prima Gadol suggested, because everything the Prima Gadol is worried about is taken care of by the fact that we're saying Kein Asa Hillel. Clear? Ubeyichut, and specifically, the Das Admor Zaken, according to the Alter Rebbe's opinion, according to the Alter Rebbe, you don't fulfill your obligation of maror according to Hillel unless you have the sandwich. So actually, the whole Prima Gadol's problem is you should say this is a remembrance for Hillel because you want to make it clear that I did my obligations already. This is only a remembrance. But according to Alter Rebbe, it's not a remembrance. It's actually a mitzvah to do so. According to Hillel, it's a mitzvah to eat this for maror. So the separation that the Prima Gadol wants us to make, that matzah and maror is obligatory, sandwich only zeichel like Hillel. According to Alter Rebbe, it's not true. According to Alter Rebbe, it's not just to remember what Hillel used to do. but it's actually the obligation to eat maror today, according to Hillel, is to have with matzah. So first of all, the separation is superfluous because you already made the statement that this is what Hillel used to do. Number one. Number two, according to Rebbe, the fact that Hillel used to do it is not therefore remember it the way he did it, but do it the way Hillel obligates you to eat maror, which is with matzah. According to Rebbe, right?
Rabbi, if you mixed matzah with maror, the matzah will can be wet.
Yeah, okay, so we discussed yesterday. We're not going to discuss that. Okay, wait, I want to stay focused.
So you're saying when you make
Yeah,
bracha
clear?
over matzah the first time, it's not complete? No, it is complete.
What?
You're saying
If you eat matzah and
need
maror
to
plain,
eat more with the matzah,
according to Hillel,
according to Hillel.
to fulfill the obligation. Yeah? As I was about to go say. Jace, moreover. So first of all, you shouldn't, it's first of all, the statement isn't true. That this is only a remembrance, whereas my obligation was done earlier. My obligation is still going according to the Rebbe's understanding of what we're doing with the sandwich. Right? My obligation for maror is still going right now.
Then there must be a bracha then, no?
Okay, that's what we already said. The bracha before extends. Right?
Well, you're not
So-
saying it over maror, that first bracha.
Sure, you're making it for maror and the
I
sandwich.
do, yeah.
We learned this yesterday,
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Right? We learned this yesterday that the bracha you made for matzah and the bracha you made for maror extends to the sandwich. We said that yesterday, right? Yeah, we're clear?
But what, you make the bracha, how do you say it? What's the statement?
Thank you, Hashem, for the mitzvah of matzah. Thank you, Hashem, for the mitzvah of maror. And both those brachas extend to the sandwich as well. Right?
Yeah.
Now, so therefore, saying that this is a remembrance for Hillel, in the Prima Gadol's view, is to separate between obligatory stuff, matzah and maror,
Yeah.
versus remembrance, sandwich, according to the Rebbe, is not a true distinction. Because according to the Rebbe, the obligation for maror is still in effect, according to Hillel, until I eat the sandwich.
Now,
It's not a true statement.
is it still rabbinic now, or is it?
Yes, it's a rabbinic mitzvah. Again, let's get this clear. What did the Rebbe tell us about sandwich? Why am I eating sandwich, according to the Rebbe?
Well, it was for the remembrance of the.
No. Yes, remembrance.
Yeah,
but-
no, he's saying no, because you still have to eat the maror with the matzah.
Oh, that's right. So it's-
to remember what Hillel
Correct.
did.
But it's not remember like the egg is a remember. There's a remembrance of the egg. There's no mitzvah to have an egg. It's a minhag to remember. But the maror is actually an obligation from the sages. Eat this in order to remember. So it's true, the reason for the sages' mitzvah is to remember, but there's still a mitzvah to eat maror. The rabbinic mitzvah. Just like there's a rabbinic mitzvah to read the Megillah to remember the story of Purim. But it's still a rabbinic mitzvah.
Two elements then, right?
Right? So, but the Prima Gadol is
Remember.
let's distinguish between reasons for the mitzvah and the fact that it is a mitzvah. Let's put it this way. The tefillin is to remember that Hashem took us out of Egypt, or Hashem is oneness of my heart and mind. Right? But it's not a remembrance. It's a mitzvah.
Got it.
It's true
Yeah.
that the mitzvah is a remembrance element. Same thing with the matzah.
It has-
We're eating the matzah because they hasted out of Egypt.
Right.
But it's a mitzvah to eat matzah. Right? So it's a mitzvah to eat maror, rabbinic mitzvah. Unlike the egg, let's say, which is to remember the Haggadah, it's not a mitzvah to have a Haggadah, to have an egg on your Seder. It's a custom we have to remember. Right? So the maror is an obligation. Yes, the obligation is to remember, but it's an obligation to eat maror. In the Alter Rebbe's view, if you don't have the maror with matzah, you did not fulfill the mitzvah of maror, according to Hillel.
Okay.
Correct? So what did Prima Gadol say? Why am I making a statement before I eat sandwich? That this is a remembrance to Hillel. What did Prima Gadol say? To separate between obligations,
Right.
which is matzah and maror, and remembrance, which is sandwich,
Which is not.
which is
really-
not true according to the Alter Rebbe.
It's
According to
a
Alter Rebbe,
mitzvah in and of
correct.
Itself to eat it with the matzah.
Correct. The Alter Rebbe's view is that the sandwich is actually part of the obligation of maror, in Hillel's view. So to make the distinction is not true. And therefore the Alter Rebbe cannot include that statement. This is a remembrance of Hillel to follow the Prima Gadol's view. Okay, moreover, okay, so far we have reasons why you don't need to put the statement that this is a remembrance for the temple. But is it so bad? The reason number one is because it's superfluous. You've already made the distinction.
Yeah. And
Number
that's-
two,
okay, now-
because there is no distinction. The koyrach is still part of your obligation. Right? Because it's part of the obligation of maror according to Hillel. Okay, but like we just finished saying, the obligation to eat maror to begin with is because of remembrance. So is it a bad thing to say this is a remembrance to the temple? Not necessary, but it isn't bad so far. Now that everybody's going to say why it's a bad thing to say that statement. Follow?
Yeah.
Okay, last paragraph on the right-hand
He
side.
already said once it's
Superfluous, but not bad.
not bad. But
Not-
now he's
not-
going to say why it's bad.
Correct. Let's see.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Moreover, Shayadei Amidazu, if I make a declaration, hi everyone, I'm eating the matzah and maror together now because of remembrance of the temple. Yovai litais, you'll make a mistake. She'ein hakricha ela lezecher.
Because you won't consider it a mitzvah.
Exactly. You're going to think that this sandwich is only a remembrance like the egg or like the zroya. But in truth, only now when you eat the sandwich are you actually fulfilling your obligation of maror according to Hillel. And we already learned before that you have to fulfill your obligation according to both Hillel and the sages because we don't know who the halacha follows.
You wouldn't be under Hillel if you didn't make the bracha.
Correct.
What about
mean-
Beit Shammai? You say nothing?
Shammai didn't speak here now. Mashake and the Prima Godim, but this is not by contrast to Prima Godim. In the parentheses in the last line, now back to the top left. Tehu l'shitasai, Prima Godim follows his view. Shebizman hazeh gam lehil yotzei dechavas maror k'sho'echad l'fnei. According to Prima Godim, even according to Hillel, you fulfill your obligation for maror by eating the maror alone.
That's a bold.
Actually, he's the more common way of learning. Alter Rebbe is the bold one.
Um,
Why is that? Let's go back to the Gemara. What did the Gemara say? The Gemara said that in temple times, you can mix your matzah and maror together because they're both biblical. In post-temple times, don't mix your matzah and maror together because your maror is rabbinic.
dilute the.
It'll dilute the flavor of the rabbinic of the matzah. If we eat it separately, the Alter Rebbe comes with this big chiddush that says that's only according to everybody else, but according to Hillel, the maror is required to have matzah with it because that's the way he used to do it. This is a chiddush of Alter Rebbe. But if you don't take that chiddush from Alter Rebbe, then before you eat the sandwich, according to all opinions, you fulfilled your obligations, and therefore, according to him, Vim Kain, according to Prima Godim, the sandwich lo yahava ela lezecher is only remembrance, just like the egg and the zroya. And therefore, he says, go ahead, make the statement. This is only a remembrance. But the Alter Rebbe takes it out because in Alter Rebbe's view, it's undermined. It's not in accordance to his position. Follow?
Because he adds the component of the mitzvah.
Because for him,
To do
the
it
sandwich
outside
is
Hillel.
actually a part of the mitzvah of maror in Hillel's view. But the Prima Godim and others don't learn that way. Right? When we get to the in-depth, I'll explain why the Alter Rebbe's version is most precise in the Gemara. We alluded to a little bit yesterday. We read the Gemara. We saw the Alter Rebbe's understanding goes precisely in the Gemara. But we'll get to that when we go in depth. Right? Follow?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just drop this. Why is Alter Rebbe's view most accurate in the Gemara? Because the Gemara said we don't know the difference between, we don't know if the halacha is like Hillel or like the others, and therefore you should eat matzah, then maror, and then together. According to Prima Godim, the fact that you don't know the difference between, you don't know which opinion is correct, Hillel or the others, has no bearing on the fact that you have a sandwich. According to the Prima Godim. Because according to the Prima Godim and others, when you eat the maror alone and the matzah alone, you fulfill your obligation according to everybody, even Hillel. So what's the Gemara's conclusion there? That because we don't know if the halacha is like Hillel or the others, therefore we do matzah, maror, and then together. What together has nothing to do with that? This statement that we don't know if the
And so you can conclude that you're doing that together just as only a remembrance.
That's correct.
component.
but the Gemara phrases it that we're doing this because we don't know if the halacha follows Hillel. Let me ask it this way. The fact that we don't know if the halacha is like Hillel or the sages, what bearing does that have on my matzah and maror today? According to the Prima Godim, no bearing whatsoever. Because the fact that I don't know if the halacha follows Hillel or the sages is only a question of temple times when I have a Pesach, whether I should mix them together or not mix them together.
Oh, right.
But in post-temple times, everybody agrees to eat them separate. So according to the Prima Godim, the Gemara's conclusion, which says, because I don't know the difference between, I don't know if the halacha is Hillel, and I don't know if the halacha is like the sages, therefore have a sandwich. What does a sandwich have to do with anything for that? That's only a temple time issue. But according to Alter Rebbe, the dispute between Hillel and the sages actually has bearing on today. How do I fulfill maror? And therefore the Gemara's conclusion that you have to have a sandwich because I don't know if the halacha follows Hillel or the sages works out perfectly. Because that dispute still extends till today. Not in how you fulfill matzah, but in how you fulfill maror.
Yeah.
Follow? So the Alter Rebbe's version actually comes out much more precise in the Gemara's language, especially based on what we said yesterday from the Rebbe. But we're going to unpack that even more, because what we're going to do, God willing, when we learn Kaidach more in depth, we only really learned the Alter Rebbe's version to the Gemara. And now we just learned the Pri Megadol's version with the question on it, right? But I want to show you 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of understanding what exactly the Gemara is concluding by saying we don't know the halacha is a killer of the others. What does the Gemara mean when it says that? And you're going to see how all those other versions struggle around what's the bearing that this dispute has of temple times to post-temple times. And according to Alter Rebbe, Machlekes still continues. Because the Machlekes continues, how do you fulfill Mara? And that's what Alter Rebbe is doing in this beautiful Luchitish. Okay, God willing, tomorrow we'll point out the other distinctions and why we say this is what we did when the temple was standing, why the extra was. We'll talk about that, as well as why we say the word Pesach, whereas other variants do not say the word Pesach. They just say he would sandwich together matzah and maror, because we only have matzah and maror, but why we say that he would have Pesach as well.
Let's cover all bases.
No,
See the matzah, maybe the maror, and then eat some.
That's what we do.
since
Right? But what are the all bases that we're covering? That's the question. What are all the bases that we're trying to cover? This is the big question.
Well, Jews.
Sorry?
Jews.
Right. The question is, does that view even extend till today? Because they were disputing in temple times when you had a Pesach offering. They're not disputing today. So how does that dispute that existed when they had a Pesach affect my obligation today? According to the Pri Megadol and others, nothing actually, other than to do an extra thing to remember. Like you have an egg and you have a zraya, you also have a sandwich. But according to Alter Rebbe, no, the dispute still extends till today in how you fill your maror. Okay. Have a wonderful day, Eden.
but since we have 2